Jason's phone vibrated on the kitchen table for the third time that morning. He didn't even look. He already knew what it was. Another email, another question, another reminder of everything going wrong. He stood still, holding his coffee mug like it was something alive. The coffee was cold. It had been cold for an hour. That's how long he'd been staring at the window, watching nothing in particular. The city outside moved fast. Cars, people, noise. So much noise. And inside? Him, silence, but not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels like a closed room with no door. The kind that presses on your chest and whispers, "You failed." Jason was a business consultant, or at least he had been. His startup had just gone under after 3 years of long nights, sacrificed birthdays, and endless presentations. Investors had pulled out. Clients had disappeared, and the team. They scattered like leaves in the wind. He had told himself he would bounce back, that it was just a setback. But weeks had passed, and nothing changed. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't think. Couldn't even answer a simple email anymore. Failure had crawled inside him and made a home. So, that morning, Jason did something strange, something he hadn't done in years. He packed a bag not for a business trip, not for a conference, not for a quick weekend escape. He didn't even check the weather or charge his laptop. He just grabbed some clothes, a notebook, an old pair of hiking boots, and a dusty travel guide he had once bought and never used. Inside the guide was a folded page marked with pencil years ago. Mount Hanari, the mountain where silence speaks. Jason remembered reading about it. A quiet place, far from the city, somewhere in the hills of a forgotten region. There was a trail, a small shelter at the top, and supposedly an old monk who lived nearby, a man who had once left everything to find peace. Jason wasn't looking for peace. Exactly. He was looking for something else. Maybe answers. Maybe rest. Maybe just space to fall apart. He left a short message on his apartment door for the delivery guy, turned off his phone, and locked the door behind him. He didn't know how long he would be gone. The journey to Mount Hanari was long. He took a train out of the city, then a smaller train into the countryside. From there, a local bus that barely ran twice a day. He was the only passenger. The further he went, the quieter everything became. No traffic, no notifications, no expectations. He started to notice things again. The way trees moved in the wind. The way the sunlight changed color as the day passed. The sound of his own breathing, it felt foreign when he finally arrived at the base of the mountain. He was surprised to find no welcome center, no signs, no guards. Just a wooden archway with a simple phrase carved across the top. Climb not to conquer, but to hear. Jason stared at the words. Something about them made his shoulders drop. Just a little. He adjusted the strap on his backpack and began the walk up. The trail was steep, narrow, and winding. Nature was everywhere. Leaves rustled. Birds called. The ground was uneven, with roots like fingers reaching up to trip him. Jason didn't rush. For once, he didn't need to be anywhere at a certain time. After 2 hours, he passed a small bench carved out of stone. He sat from there. He could see the valley below. Tiny villages. River streams like silver threads. No buildings taller than a tree. No noise. For the first time in weeks, Jason took a deep breath and let it out slowly. His body ached from the climb, but his mind felt different. Not better, but quieter. He opened his notebook and wrote just one sentence. I don't know who I am without my work. Then he closed it again. As he climbed higher, the air grew cooler. A fog rolled in, soft and gentle, like the mountain was hiding its secrets for later. By late afternoon, Jason reached the shelter. It was simple wood and stone, with a slanted roof and a small fireplace. No electricity, no modern anything. But it was clean, dry and peaceful. Next to the shelter was a path leading further up. A sign pointed toward it, to the silence. Jason decided to wait. He needed rest. He lit a fire, cooked some instant noodles, and sat in silence. Watching the flames dance, he wondered if the monk was real, if he lived further up, if he would even speak to someone like Jason. But more than anything, Jason wondered, what if I never bounce back? What if failure is not just a chapter, but the end of my story? That night, he couldn't sleep. The wind whispered through the trees. The mountain breathed around him, and deep inside, something else stirred. Not hope, not yet. But maybe curiosity. Jason woke just before sunrise. It wasn't the cold that stirred him. It wasn't a dream, either. It was something quieter, like an invitation. The air outside the shelter was crisp, and the mountain was still dressed in mist. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching against the dirt, breath visible in the dawn air. For a moment, he thought the world was frozen in time. Then a bird called. Just one. And the silence that followed was somehow louder than the sound. Itself, Jason remembered the sign. To the silence. He followed the path. It was narrow, bordered by wildflowers and moss-covered stones. Trees arched over the trail like gentle guardians. The fog made everything look soft, dreamlike. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because it felt wrong to rush. After some time, Jason didn't know how long he saw it. A small wooden cabin tucked between two ancient trees. There was no fence, no mailbox. Just a garden with stones arranged in perfect circles and a quiet wooden bench facing the rising sun. On that bench sat an old man. He wore a robe the color of the earth. His hands rested gently on his knees. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful, not the kind of peace you fake, but the kind you wear like second skin. Jason hesitated. Then, unsure of what else to do, he approached. The old man opened his eyes. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Jason as if he already knew why he was there. Not in a magical way, but in that rare, human way. The way someone looks at you and actually sees you. Jason tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. He felt strangely exposed, like words would ruin the air. Finally, he managed. "Are you?" "The monk." The old man smiled, just barely. "I'm someone who listens," he said. Jason sat next to him. The bench was cold. The mountain was quiet. And still, no questions came. The monk turned his head slightly toward him. "You don't need to explain," he said gently. "You've brought enough noise inside you already." Jason blinked. He hadn't said anything. And yet, the man was right. They sat in silence for what felt like hours. Jason's thoughts were loud at first, crashing like waves. All the failures. The deals that died. The nights he worked until dawn. The slow collapse. The shame. The guilt. But the mountain didn't care. The wind didn't care. The monk didn't judge. And eventually, the noise began to fade. That's when the monk spoke again. "People come here thinking they'll find answers, but mountains don't give answers. They only hold space for the questions to breathe." Jason turned to look at him. The monk continued. "Down there, people chase so much noise, they forget what silence sounds like. They fear it. Because silence speaks in a language they stopped learning as children." Jason nodded slowly. "I don't even know what I'm looking for." "That's good," the monk replied. "You finally stopped pretending to know." They shared tea in silence. The monk boiled water over a small fire and poured it into wooden cups. The tea was earthy, unfamiliar, but comforting. "Do you know," the monk said, "that trees don't grow faster when you shout at them?" Jason smiled, a real, tired smile. "I've been shouting at myself for months," he said. "And how tall have you grown?" Jason laughed. then fell quiet again. His eyes dropped to the ground. "I failed," he whispered. The monk didn't flinch. "Good." Jason looked up, confused. "Good," he echoed. "Yes," the monk said. "Because you're here." Jason stared. "Success rarely brings people up this path," the monk said. "Failure does. Grief does. Loss does. The mountain is not a reward, it's a teacher. And teachers don't appear until the student falls." Jason felt something in his chest loosen. It wasn't gone, but it shifted. "You're not broken." The monk said, "You're being remade." The sun had fully risen now. The fog was lifting. The forest had color again, greens, browns, blues. Birds moved through the trees. A fox crossed a distant path. Everything was alive. "I don't know what's next," Jason said. "You don't have to," the monk answered. "Not yet. First, you must understand the failure." Jason was quiet. "It wasn't just a business," he finally said. "It was everything. My name, my pride, my identity. And what remains now that it's gone?" the monk asked. Jason thought for a long moment. "Just me." The monk smiled again, a little deeper this time. Then now he said softly, "We can begin." The next morning, Jason woke before the sun. He hadn't planned to. His body simply knew. There was no alarm, no meetings waiting, no unread messages pulling him back into the storm of doing. He stepped outside the small shelter and walked to the bench by the monk's cabin. The old man wasn't there yet. Jason sat alone this time, wrapped in the cool breath of dawn. The trees around him stood tall and patient. The world didn't expect anything from him up here. No results, no improvements, no productivity. And still, he felt like something was growing. Not success. Something quieter. The monk appeared as the sky turned orange, holding 2 cups of tea. He didn't speak at first, and neither did Jason. They just sipped. Like old friends who didn't need words. Then the monk said, "There's a fire in you." Jason looked down at his cup. "I don't feel like there is." "That's because you've mistaken the flame for the smoke." Jason furrowed his brow. "I don't understand." The monk smiled gently. "You think your ambition, your constant movement, your success was the fire, but those were only the sparks. What you're feeling now, the emptiness, the heat. Without direction, that is the real fire, the one that doesn't burn for attention, but for meaning." Jason was quiet. The monk leaned forward slightly. "You built your life on noise, Jason. Applause, validation. Movement, it gave you identity. But now, in the stillness, you can finally meet the part of you that survives without all that." Jason took a deep breath. He didn't have a response, and maybe that was the point. Later that day, they walked deeper into the forest. The path was narrow and wild. Roots threatened to trip them. Branches reached across like fingers, but Jason followed slowly, intentionally. The monk moved with ease, even with his age. He didn't force the path. He didn't push against nature. He walked with it. They came to a small clearing where sunlight poured in like golden water. In the center was a circle of stones. Inside the circle, there was a pile of blackened wood, the remains of an old fire. "This," the monk said, "is where I burned everything I thought I was." Jason turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "When I first came here," the monk explained, "I brought with me all the identities I had clung to. Teacher, father, husband, man of reason. I brought them all." He bent down and touched the cold ash. "Then, one by one, I wrote them on paper. I named every label, every version of myself I had created to survive in the world below. And I burned them here." Jason swallowed. "Did it help?" The monk looked up. "It didn't fix me. It freed me. They sat on the edge of the clearing. Jason stared at the ash. He could almost see himself doing the same, writing down every title he had carried. Like a crown and a chain: founder, CEO, innovator, leader, man-who-has-all-together. Jason closed his eyes. I don't even know who I am without all that. Good, the monk said. That means your real self is finally close enough to hear. As the day faded into twilight, Jason picked up a stick and began drawing circles in the dirt. One for each failure. One for each mistake. He didn't count them. That wasn't the point. He just let them live. Let them exist. No judgment, no fixing. Just recognition. I blamed myself, Jason finally said, for everything. The collapse. The people who left. The ones I couldn't help. The monk nodded slowly. Blame is the smoke. Responsibility is the fire. Jason looked at him. The monk continued. Blame consumes. Responsibility transforms. Jason stared at the dirt in front of him. He thought of the moment he signed the shutdown notice, the calls he didn't return, the messages he read but never answered. He thought of his team, the people who once believed in him. He had failed them, but maybe he could hold that failure in his hands without letting it define him. Maybe the fire could still be useful. Back at the cabin that night, Jason opened his notebook. He turned to the page where he had written, I don't know who I am without my work. Below it, he wrote something new. Maybe I don't have to know yet. Maybe it's okay to rebuild without blueprints. He put down the pen and looked out the window. The stars were beginning to appear, small lights in a dark sky. Each one had burned for millions of years, quietly, without applause. The next morning, Jason awoke to the sound of rain, soft, steady, and unbothered by the world. He didn't rush to get up. There was no schedule to follow. No inbox waiting. Just the rhythmic tapping of droplets on the wooden roof above him. He lay there for a while, listening. It wasn't silence, but it was peace. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel guilty for doing nothing. When the rain softened to a drizzle, Jason stepped outside with his notebook. He sat on the bench beside the monk's cabin, wrapped in a wool blanket he'd found the night before. He began writing. Not about plans or ideas or strategies. He wrote about his backpack. Not the one with his clothes and notebook. The other one, the invisible one. The one he'd been carrying for years. He started listing the things. Inside it, expectations. Shame for not being further along. Guilt for not calling his mother back. The weight of every almost. The voice that said, you're only as good as your last win. The fear of being ordinary, the memory of being overlooked, the pressure to prove he was worth something. Each word felt heavy and honest. He paused after a while, staring at the page. Then he heard the monk's voice behind him. That's a heavy pack you've got there. Jason didn't turn around. I've been carrying it for a long time. The monk sat down beside him. And what if I told you, he said, that most of it was never yours to carry? Jason looked up, confused. What do you mean? The monk pointed to the notebook. These weights, many were handed to you. Some by people who meant well. Others by people who were hurting. Some you picked up because the world told you it was how to succeed. But none of them are you. Jason's mouth was dry. Then who am I without them? A person. Not a performance, the monk said. Jason closed the notebook. I don't know how to let go. You don't have to let go all at once. The monk said, you just have to stop tightening your grip. Later that day, a monk took Jason on a different trail. It wasn't steep or long. It's just a winding path through a grove of old pine trees. At the end of the trail was a small wooden structure, no bigger than a closet. Inside, hanging from hooks and nails, were dozens of old bags, coats, and belts. Jason stepped inside. "What is this place?" The monk smiled. "A collection," he said, "of burdens left behind." Jason turned slowly. Each item looked weathered, aged by time and stories. Some had names written on scraps of cloth. Others had quotes or memories pinned to them. He read a few. "My father's silence. The fear of being wrong. I was never enough. Perfection is safety." Jason swallowed hard. People came up here and left these. The monk nodded. Not because they were ready, but because they were tired. Jason looked down. At his hands, he thought of all the years he spent chasing approval, all the nights he'd stayed awake crafting the perfect pitch, rewriting a single slide 10 times to impress someone who wouldn't even remember his name. He thought of the moment. He realized he didn't know how to rest. That even on vacations, he felt the need to be productive. That failure wasn't just something that happened. It was something he believed defined him. And now he was in a tiny room full of other people's stories. He found an empty space. On the wall, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card from his old business, the one with his name, his title, and a logo that no longer existed. He pinned it to the wall. Underneath it, he wrote, "I don't need to be this to be worthy." Then he stepped outside. The wind had picked up, and somehow he felt lighter. That night, Jason sat by the fire with the monk. They didn't speak much, just the crackling of wood. The calm of being Jason broke the silence with a question. "Do you think we ever really get over our failures?" The monk stirred his tea. "No," he said, "but we grow around them, like trees that bend around a stone. We don't erase the pain, we integrate it." Jason leaned back and closed his eyes for the first time. Failure didn't feel like the end of the road. It felt like a path, a quieter one. Jason woke to a stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt full of air, of presence, of possibility. The monk was already outside, tending to a small garden behind the cabin. Jason joined him without a word. He simply knelt in the dirt and copied what he saw. Dig, plant, cover, breathe. It wasn't about productivity. It wasn't about doing it right. It was just being there. For a man who had lived years by metrics, numbers, results, achievements, the simplicity of that morning felt like an unfamiliar kindness. Later, they sat with tea again. Jason asked, "Did you ever regret leaving your life behind?" The monk stirred his tea, then looked up slowly. "I didn't leave it. I unwrapped it." Jason blinked. "Unwrapped?" The monk nodded. "So much of who I thought I was packaging, job titles, opinions, fears, praise, stories others told me about myself, and stories I repeated until I believed them." He sipped his tea. "One day I realized I'd been living inside a noise that wasn't mine." Jason nodded slowly. He knew that feeling. "Do you know," the monk said, "what your name is beneath all the noise?" Jason looked puzzled. "My actual name?" "No," the monk said gently. "Your true name. The one that isn't made of words, but of essence. Of who you are when no one's watching, when no one's needing you to succeed, when no one's calling you smart or strong or brilliant." Jason was silent. "I don't think I've ever met that version of me," he said softly. The monk smiled. "Then maybe that's why you're here." That afternoon, Jason took a walk alone. He followed no path in particular, just let his feet move where they wanted. He passed trees he hadn't noticed before, rocks that looked like faces, a stream that sang more than it flowed. He stopped beside the water and crouched down. His reflection looked different, not younger, not older, just quieter. He watched it for a long time. Then he asked aloud, not to anyone in particular, Who am I when no one needs anything from me? And for the first time in his life, he didn't rush to answer. That evening, back at the cabin, he opened his notebook again, on a fresh page. He wrote, "I built a version of myself that was easy to admire. Now, I want to meet the version that is easy to be." He paused, then added, "I want to be someone who can sit in silence and not be afraid of what rises." In it, before going to sleep, Jason asked the monk one more question. "Do you think we ever stop chasing noise?" The monk smiled. "No, but we learn to recognize its shape, and we choose differently." Jason nodded. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the one he needed. That night, he dreamed he was walking through a crowded city full of voices, calling his name. He turned to follow them, but then he heard a softer voice, one that didn't call from outside, but from within. It didn't use his name. It didn't promise success. It simply said, "You are already enough." And for the first time, Jason listened. The decision to leave came like the morning fog, slowly, gently, without force. Jason didn't wake up with a dramatic realization. There was no epiphany, no divine moment of transformation, just a quiet knowing in his chest. It's time. He sat by the bench one last time, watching the sun stretch across the sky like a familiar hand reaching out. The monk joined him, not as a guide this time, but as a witness. "You're not the same man who arrived," the monk said softly. Jason smiled. "I still don't have all the answers." "Good," the monk replied. "That means you're finally asking the right questions." Jason packed lightly. He left behind the business card he'd pinned in the room of burdens. He left the shame he'd carried in silence. He left the need to explain himself. But he took something new. Not confidence, not certainty, but clarity. Not about what he'd do, but about who he could be. Before he began his walk down the mountain, Jason turned to the monk one last time. "Do you think the world will be any different when I go back?" The monk looked at him gently. "No," he said, "but you will be, and that's more than enough." Jason nodded, and with that, he stepped onto the trail, not as a man running from failure, but as someone walking with it. The walk down was slower than the climb, not because of the terrain, but because Jason didn't feel the urgency anymore. Every step was deliberate. Every view, a gift. The valley opened below him like a memory, returning to greet him. The village looked the same. The air was warmer. But something in Jason had shifted. It wasn't that life had changed. He had simply stopped, trying to outrun it, at the small train station. Jason bought a one-way ticket back to the city. He had no job waiting, no big plan, no perfect version of himself ready to present to the world. But he felt more real than he had in years, and real was enough. Back in the city, the noise returned, cars, horns, messages dot the rhythm of ambition. But now, Jason heard it differently. It was no longer his pulse. It was just background music. He didn't need to dance to it if he didn't want to. He began building new routines. He took long walks without headphones. He reconnected with old friends, not to impress them, but to see them. He called his mother. Sometimes he woke up still feeling lost. Sometimes he stared at a blank page, unsure what to write. But now he didn't panic. He didn't label it as failure. He just named it a pause. And in every pause, he remembered. The mountain, he kept one thing from that journey close. A folded piece of paper he'd found on the monk's bench. Left perhaps for him, or for anyone, it said, "You are not your resume. You are not your failures. You are not the voice that tells you to prove your worth. You are the breath between the noise. You are the quiet that remains. You are the name." Beneath the name, Jason read it every morning, not to remember the monk, but to remember himself. Jason had always lived by milestones. His life, for as long as he could remember, had been a series of checkboxes. Get into a good university, land a promising job. Get promoted, start a company, scale it, sell it, be remembered. Me. One felt like climbing a ladder that never ended. And yet, when he reached the top of one, the joy never lasted. Not for more than a few days. The applause faded. The rush disappeared. And the silence always came back. Back in the city now. Living slower and more intentionally, Jason began to notice something strange, the most beautiful. Moments were never on the checklist. They happened between things, not during a pitch, but during the walk to the office. When the sky turned pink and the world held its breath. Not during a product launch, but when someone on his team quietly thanked him for listening. Not during a vacation photo, but in the 3 seconds when he stood in the ocean and let the waves knock the air from his chest. And now he could finally feel them because he wasn't chasing the next box. One afternoon, Jason sat at a coffee shop near the park. He wasn't working. He wasn't networking. He was just there. A notebook open, a cup of tea in hand, watching people pass, watching leaves fall, watching his own breath. For a while, he had thought he needed a new plan. A rebrand, a relaunch. But what he was slowly learning was this. You don't need to return as a better version of yourself. You can simply return as yourself. And that was already enough. He started writing. Again, not for a blog, not for followers, not to build a presence. Just to notice things. Little things. A child laughing, a stranger helping. Someone crossed the street, the way sunlight hit the steam rising from his cup. The shape of stillness in those small moments. Jason found something he hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment, not the loud kind that demands a celebration. The quiet kind that feels like a soft yes from life. He met with people again, former colleagues, friends he'd lost touch with. But this time, he didn't try to prove anything. He didn't need them to see him as successful. Again, he didn't steer the conversation toward work or achievements. He just asked real questions. How have you really been? What's been on your mind? What have you let go of lately? And often, something incredible happened. They told the truth. Walls dropped. Egos faded. Real, human connection returned. Because Jason had stopped trying to be someone and had started trying to be with someone. He wasn't trying to fix his life anymore. He was trying to live it fully, presently, kindly. He still made plans. He still had goals. But they weren't cages. They were possibilities. And in between each one, he allowed space for being, because the milestones didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was how he walked. Between them, one morning, he wrote this in his notebook. I used to think I was the sum of my highlights. Now I believe I am the quiet between them. I don't need to achieve more to be enough. I just need to show up fully to the life I already have. And somehow, that felt like the biggest milestone of all. The idea came to Jason one quiet afternoon, sitting by his bedroom window with the light gently falling across his notebook. He had just finished journaling about a difficult moment, one he hadn't shared with anyone yet. The night he'd sat on his apartment floor, surrounded by half-packed boxers and broken pride, unsure if he wanted to keep going. Not because of the business, not because of money, but because he didn't know who he was without the weight of being impressive. So he did something he had never done before. He decided to write a letter to himself, to the version of Jason who had hit the ground and thought there was nothing left. He wrote slowly, not trying to be wise, not trying to be poetic, just trying to be honest. Dear me, I know you don't recognize yourself right now. You've always been the guy with the answers, the drive, the roadmap, and now you feel like a broken compass. I want to tell you something, not to fix you, but to hold you. You didn't fail because you were weak. You failed because you were brave enough to try something real. And that matters. Even if no one applauds it, even if no one sees it, even if it hurts. Jason paused. His hand trembled a little. He took a breath and kept going. I remember how you lay awake at night, trying to make sense of the silence. I know how loud your thoughts were, how heavy your chest felt, how you tried to smile through it. Even when no one was asking you to, you thought you had to keep performing. That the only way to earn love, even your own, was to be amazing all the time. But listen to me. You are allowed to sit down. You are allowed to cry. You are allowed to stop proving, because being human is not a performance. It's not a pitch deck. It's not a timeline. It's this: the breath you just took. The moment your heart softened the first time you told someone, I don't know. That's the beginning of your real life. Jason wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The page was full. But he had more to say. You're going to learn things in the silence you never could in the spotlight. You're going to lose the version of yourself that was exhausting to carry and meet someone quieter, stronger, and more free. You'll still make mistakes. You'll still get lost sometimes. But you won't run from the silence anymore. Because the silence isn't empty. It's you. And that's the one person you've been running from the longest. So, stop, turn around, and say hello. Jason signed it. Love, the man who made it through. Then he folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and wrote nothing on the outside. Because it didn't need a name, it already knew where it belonged. That night, Jason lit a candle and read the letter out loud. Not for anyone else, but for his own heart to hear it again. And when he finished, he sat in the glow of the flame, breathing slowly, not celebrating, not grieving, just existing. Whole, unfinished, enough. Jason never set out to inspire anyone. In fact, after returning from the mountain, he made a quiet promise to himself. No more trying to be someone, just being. He wasn't chasing influence. He wasn't chasing impact. He was just trying to live more honestly, to listen better, to speak less, to show up fully wherever he was. And yet, something began to happen. Not because he tried to make it happen, but because he stopped trying so hard to control the way he was seen. People noticed that it started with small things. A friend at dinner who suddenly opened up about their divorce, saying, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I just feel safe. A former employee who messaged out of nowhere, you always worked harder than anyone I knew. But I think you were also the loneliest. I get it now. A barista who said, you're one of the few people who actually looks me in the eyes when you say thank you. These weren't dramatic moments. There were no cameras, no spotlights, just presence. And presence, Jason learned, was its own kind of leadership. One morning at a co-working space, Jason overheard a young entrepreneur panicking over a failed campaign. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the voice reminded him of, well, himself. The fear, the tension, the self-blame. Jason waited until the young man was alone, and then gently asked, want to go for a walk? They walked through the nearby park, slowly. Jason didn't give advice. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened, deeply, like the monk had listened to him at the end of the walk. The young man said, I thought I was supposed to fake confidence until I made it. But I think what I really needed was permission to fall apart first. Jason nodded. You're allowed to be human, he said. That's where your real strength begins. The young man paused. Where did you learn that? Jason smiled. A mountain taught me, he said. But only after I stopped shouting and started listening. Jason began to notice a quiet truth about life. We don't always teach through answers. Sometimes we teach through who we are when we stop pretending. People started asking Jason to speak at events, in small groups, over coffee. Not because of his past title, not because of his LinkedIn profile, but because his honesty made space. Space to breathe, space to reflect, space to reflect. One day, someone asked him, "How did you turn your failure into something so meaningful?" Jason thought about it for a moment. "I didn't turn anything," he replied. "I just stopped hiding it. And when I brought it into the light, I found that I wasn't alone." He began writing again, more publicly this time. Not as the expert, not as the comeback story. Just as a human who had walked through fire, sat in silence, and survived. His words weren't polished, but they were real. People wrote to him saying, "You put into words something I've been afraid to admit. You reminded me that I don't have to have it all together. You made me feel seen." And every time he read those messages, Jason thought of the monk, of the fire without flame, of the burden room, of the silence that once felt terrifying, and now felt like home. He didn't become famous, he became whole. And in doing so, he gave others permission to begin their own journey toward wholeness, without noise, without shame, without needing to be anything more than exactly who they were. Years passed, not quickly, not slowly, just honestly. Jason's life, once defined by launches and metrics and deadlines, was now guided by something softer, a different kind of rhythm. He still worked, he still made plans, he still failed sometimes, but he no longer measured his days by output. He measured them by presence, by how fully he showed up, by how gently he treated himself when he couldn't, by how often he remembered to breathe before reacting. One fall morning, Jason returned to Mount Hanari. He wasn't escaping this time. He wasn't trying to rebuild anything. He wasn't searching for a version of himself to fix. He was just visiting an old friend. The monk was still there, older now, somehow, lighter than before. They embraced without words, and then they sat together in silence. The mountain hadn't changed. The air still felt ancient. The fog still rolled in like a secret. The bench still waited, patient and unmoved. But Jason had changed, and yet he wasn't trying to be better anymore, just truer, more himself, less of the noise, more of the core. He shared with the monk how life had unfolded since that first visit, the people he'd met, the stories he'd heard, the small, quiet ways he'd tried to make room for others, the way the mountain had made room for him. The monk listened. Then, after a while, he asked, "Do you still hear the silence?" He smiled. All the time. It was true. He carried it with him now, not as emptiness, not as something to fear, but as space. A calm place inside him, where judgment couldn't live, where pressure melted, where he could sit with himself and not flinch. The silence had become his companion, a reminder, a mirror, a resting place before he left the mountain. Jason returned to the old burden room. He walked slowly through the space, fingers brushing gently over coats and bags and faded notes. He found his old business card, still pinned to the wall. He smiled at it, not with regret, but with gratitude, because that card, that failure, had opened the door to everything that followed, to stillness, to softness, to truth. He left something new beneath it, a note, written in his familiar hand: "I no longer carry the weight of being someone I'm not. I am here. That's enough." Jason walked down the mountain for the last time, but he didn't feel like he was leaving it behind. The mountain was in his breath, in his pauses, in his listening. Because silence, once welcomed, never really leaves you. It stays in how you walk, in how you love, in how you forgive yourself on the hard days, in how you show up when no one's watching. And so, when people asked Jason years later, "How did you find peace?" he never gave them a formula. He simply said, "I failed, I sat down, I listened, and in the silence, I heard myself again." The end.